Hey guys, Ben here, aka Wallaby, and welcome to Endgames with Wallaby. I'm sure you found yourself in a position where you've just got a queen or a rook on the board, so let's go through some basics today to find out how to win those games every single time. Okay, so we've reached this position. Let's say that it's us to move. We're going to promote to a queen, obviously. Now black's going to want to stay in the center of the board. The reason for that is we want to push black to one of the four corners of the board. Two key things to remember: one, force the king to a corner; two, don't stalemate the king. That's the two main rules. What we're going to do is put the queen a knight's move away from the king, so that square would have worked too. But the reason we want to keep this queen a knight's move away is because it controls these squares, right? It also controls this kind of box here that we've made. And what that's going to do is force the king eventually into the corner of the box. So if we had to put the queen here, we've controlled these squares and made a box forcing the king to the A1 corner. Either way, let's move on. The king will, let's say, will move this way, trying to stay somewhat near the center. What we're going to do every time is copy the king's move. So the king went one square diagonal up and to the right. We're going to do the exact same thing with the queen. Notice that keeps it a knight's move away, and the box is now changed. Right, it's got a bit smaller this way. Let's say the king goes here. Well, we're going to go this way. King went one square down, queen went one square down too. We now have a box that is a little bit smaller. If the king goes here, we go, remember, that way. King goes here, we go this way. King goes here. Well, that's good for us because we force it to the edge of the board now. We go this way, and now we have a box that is this big. So now the king's forced to go towards the corner of the board. We'll follow with our queen. And after this move, this is the key position to remember. The queen is on that square that allows the king to move. The last thing we want to do here is copy the king's move. We'll be stalemating our opponent, right? That's a draw. We don't want to draw. So what we're going to do is just move the king. Leave the queen there. Remember, the king has two squares to move through, and that's going to be enough. So now black to move, the king will go there. We'll bring our king in. And eventually, when you reach this position, when your king's close enough, no matter what the move is, we can just checkmate like so. So remembering, guys, keeping the queen a knight's move away and copying the king's move will eventually force it towards a corner of the board. Once the king's got to a position where it has two squares left, remembering not to stalemate it. Instead, we want to bring in the king at that point, so we can use the king and the queen to make a checkmate. And there you go, that's how to checkmate with a king and a queen. Let's move on now to how we can do it with a king and a rook. This is also winning. So what we want to do is first create a barrier with the rook. We're going to force the king to the edge of the board and then make a checkmate. So what we're going to do is create this barrier now. So the king cannot cross that fourth rank. King's now, we'll say it's forced to the side, otherwise then it gets closer towards the edge of the board. It obviously wants to stay towards the middle. What we'll do is just put the rook to the side, out of the king's way, so it can't chase it down. Now, if the king were to move back towards our king here, notice how there's an opposition. Just like we covered last time, right? The king cannot move past our king. So once we check it and control these squares as well, the king is now forced back. So that's good for us. If the king ever moves in front of our king like that, we can force it back using the rook. Let's see what happens if the king goes this way, or we can bring our king closer. Once again, if it goes back, we have the opposition. We can throw in a check. So we'll go this way. We bring the king back in. Now the king's forced either to move back, in which case we can kind of lock it into that 6th rank now, or just move in front of our king, in which case we can once again force it back to the 6th rank. We'll move our king up when that happens. And now, all right, let's say it tries to chase down the rook. If we go here, that doesn't really work for us because it can keep moving, but let's say we do anyway. He wants to chase down the rook, sure. Now we can protect the rook. We could also just do this, and now black's in a position where it's either forced to move in front of our king and get forced back, or get stuck in that corner. And eventually, once again, we're going to force it back. So we can just repeat this process. You know, let's say it chooses a bit of an easy method this time. We can always make waiting moves too. Using the rook, there's nothing wrong with that. But eventually the king's going to get forced to the edge of the board, which is great. Let's say it goes this way. Tries to get to the rook once again. Just make a waiting move, yeah? Just push it to the edge of the board, and now it's too far away. If it ever tries to approach the rook, we just checkmate. So remember, this is now checkmate. So let's say it runs away, we just chase it down with the king. If it ever moves in front of there, we can always checkmate it. And now it's actually forced to move right in front of our king, and that is always going to be checkmate. So you can see in this endgame the power of the opposition. Having our king in front of our opponent's king is really important, but this time in this endgame, it's important to remember that we want our opponent to take the opposition. We want our opponent to move in front of our king, because that's when we can move the rook in to make that check and win the game. So remember, with that rook and king endgame, using the rook to block off a section of the board for the king, and eventually maneuvering our king in front of our opponent's king, forcing them to take the opposition, and then we're going to drive it back. Repeat that for every single row of the board, whether it's files or ranks. You can do this sideways if you need to as well. And then eventually we're going to repeat those steps on the edge of the board, in which case the king cannot move back, and that's going to be checkmate. Guys, I hope you learned something today. Thanks so much for watching. Feel free to click here to check out another video of mine. Feel free to like and subscribe as well, and let me know what other endgames you'd like me to cover in the comments below. Guys, I've been Wallaby, and thanks so much for watching.